Well, anyways, it's I don't know if you were you introducing me or not. I don't know what happened, but okay, so it's me. But anyways, welcome back for our second session of the six, looking at Brubeck's music, and I'm really excited to have joining me a special guest. I dearly love this man as my brother, and he knows I mean that when I say that, and to find someone to work with musically that has that connection of friendship and brotherhood at the same time as just being a good musician. And this man is an incredible musician who has worked with so many artists, from Diane Shore. He plays currently with Bobby Floyd. He's worked with Dr. John. He's recorded, performed internationally. And so the fact that I get to work with him as well, I'm just like, what did I do to deserve this? So please welcome with your hands. You can welcome Reggie Jackson, who will be joining us in our conversation this evening. And so what I wanted to do is last week, we kind of did a really broad overview of Brubeck. I just wanted to get a taste of Brubeck going, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, a taste of Brubeck going in your mind and your thoughts, and get us to a point of then launching in now into the innovation and the creativity that inspired his improvisation and the work he did with his quartet. And so today I'm going to hone in on his piano playing rhythmically and the work of his drummers. And Reggie's going to weigh in on some of the drummers, two that I think are the most pinnacle to shaping Brubeck, which is Joe Morello and Alan Dawson. And then also talk about the rhythmic features of the different, how he layered the different time signatures playing with the quartet. So the listening examples, and we got a lot of great listening examples for you today. The listening examples are just a showcase of some of his solos. So some of them we'll listen to in the entirety, and I'll kind of set them up so we know what we're listening to, so we can appreciate what we're hearing when we're listening to the interplay between his piano playing and the drum work, or just the rhythm work that's in the quartet. Next week we'll be exploring the harmonic side, and that's where George Michael, who plays in the group, and Reggie knows really well, obviously, but my saxophonist will be coming in and talking about the harmonic side and melodic side of Brubeck's playing, and the work that he did with Paul Desmond and those. So it's kind of like these next two sessions are really studying him as the innovator, developing the quartet sound that made him pretty popular. So one of the things I wanted to kind of throw out there, if you think back to some of the things we talked about, is just remember Brubeck formed his ideas about rhythm, especially by growing up on the ranch in California. So while he was growing up and was going to be an actual rancher and cowboy, he was listening to all those sounds and all those different rhythms, the rhythm of the well, the tractor, the different sounds of the clip clopping of the horses, which, define, that. And so as we start looking at his life as the musician there with rhythm, we're going to get to a point by the end of the session where we're going to do some studying of the Take Five, the famous Take Five song on the Time Out album, and how that came to be. And we're going to play a little bit of the banter in the rehearsal in the recording studio. And I'm just excited for you to hear that, because it kind of shows how they evolved these crazy time signatures into the music. So one of the things that I just kind of want to underlay and just remind is, remember, he grew up as a kid on the ranch, rhythmically outside. Harmonically, he was laying underneath the piano when his mom was giving classical piano lessons to students. So having those two ideas really informed how he started to evolve and ignite this idea of many different styles of music coming together into one piece of music. So I would dub this as cultural exchange. So early on in his life, before he was traveling the world and going to the Middle East, and before going to Japan and in Asia and studying the sounds of African, the African styles that he was learning and infusing while he traveled the world, think back younger, just coming back from World War II, remember I played the recording of the octet where he was really studying all those different harmonies. And I know some of you afterwards wrote and said that octet was really a crazy sound. And I said, but listen to all of them, because it's great writing. If you stop thinking jazz for a moment and just think pure composition and think about what he was doing with layering all those different things, it was absolutely incredible. And then he was applying that to jazz. Once we got through that octet in the late 40s, then he went into his trio work in the 1950s first, before the quartet. So one of the things I wanted to kind of point out as we're listening to Brubeck and the young Brubeck, the young improviser, is think a couple things. Remember, he loves classical music. And so later in his life, he uses and imitates Bach in his own writing, but he uses Bach as an improvisational feature in his piano playing or as introductions into different parts of like interludes in the piece to get from one to another. And the other thing that he's attracted to is these multi-layers of harmony or bitonal or tritonal harmonies. So if I was to play a normal chord that we think classical music, that normal chord would probably sound like this. This is a nice major chord, just da, 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 you know what I mean? It's just something that we're used to and our ears can identify. If I take that simple chord and I want to make it a jazz chord, then it would sound probably something like this. So it has more shape and color to it. Or if I wanted to make it more bluesy, it might sound like this. And so you have a little bit of that darker shading in the sound. So traditional classical, jazz, but what Brubeck would do is he would take that traditional sound, so there's that bass chord, he would make it into the jazz chord, and then he would layer another whole chord on top of it in a different key. So I'm playing one chord in one key right now. Then I would layer another whole chord on top of it. Here's the next chord, and I'll spell the chord out so you can hear it. So when I put those two chords together, it sounds a little dissonant, does it not? But at the same time, how he uses the chord is as a block structure of tension. And you're going to hear this in his playing that he uses this tension, and then he uses it rhythmically at the same time. So now I have this block chord, and I'm going to apply a rhythm to it. And then you hear the release. So he would get into this bitonal structures with these block chords, and you'll hear that as we look at his playing, because as he got into that harmonic stuff, which we'll talk a little bit more next week, and he started using the rhythmic and repetitiveness, that started to shape how the musicians in his group responded to him. If you remember last week, we showed the video, or the last session, we showed the video of St. Louis Blues in 1964, the classic quartet. And you got Eugene Wright, Senator Wright on the bass, and you have Joe Morello on the drums. And if you remember that, he went out of the blues and he almost went into this complete hymn-like, what we expect to see out of a church in Germany type of thing for almost a minute, and then came back and started jamming on blues again. And I always love that the classic where the camera just caught Gene Wright looking over at Joe Morello at the same time, and both of them shaking their heads like, what just happened here? And that's where Joe Morello said, look, if you're going to play with Brubeck, here's the lesson. If you walk out on stage and you hold on for dear life until it's over with, because you never knew where he would go. But it shaped these musicians to respond to him and think differently, is that there was constantly going to be a change. They could rehearse all they want, but once we got to the stage, it was going to be a different story based on what Brubeck was feeling, based on what the guys were feeling. And when you have an artist like Brubeck, who is really into experimentation and thinking, how can we push? Think back on that video we played last week, where Brubeck is in the interview, I can't remember whose TV show, in the 1960s, and he was telling us, jazz is boring. It's only in 4/4. We need to push beyond those boundaries, and everything's in one key. We can do many different key signatures, and he was laughing and joking about it, but his mind was there. And so it dubbed him as an improviser. People would say, he doesn't play like the jazz musician. He actually plays like a composer, someone who's like composed this multi-layer piece at the piano, and then he's delivering it being with these guys in the quartet. And so it put him in this unique place of this cultural exchange. So when if I'm copying, and I'm just keeping cool like that, Brubeck again would use these big solid chords. And so you feel like this perpetual motion, like, oh, we're on a ride or we're on a story, and then it's going to deliver us to something else. So these first couple things, recordings that we're going to play for you, and we'll play just the solo parts in the entirety, and then talk a little bit about it, kind of demonstrates these kind of functions that he's doing rhythmically. And these are all songs that I chose purposely that that really demonstrate his interaction with Joe Morello, who was the first drummer of the classic quartet, helped kind of create the classic quartet. But to get us started, I wanted to go back to the Dave Brubeck Trio, recorded in the early 50s. And this is his recording of Back Home Again in Indiana. And we're going to listen to the whole song in its entirety. And so Trish, if you want to go ahead and play, and just listen to how he takes this whole song over the course of 2 minutes and what we get out of it. So when you listen to that, you hear this beautiful ballad in the beginning, traditional jazz playing, I guess I would call it. And then all of a sudden we have this whole little Bach interlude that brings us right into this slamming swing, pretty hard swing. And then as he's going through it, you hear all this kind of like one-line melodies. You hear this chordal, this large chordal exchange in his playing, and then you hear this space that he leaves where the drummer is constantly being able to push and drive that rhythm. Well, in the late 50s, as Brubeck was developing the quartet, he had many drummers in the 50s, and of course that he's worked with it through the years. But one drummer in particular really grasped onto what Dave was doing and really helped perpetuate and develop that sound, and that's drummer Joe Morello. And before we play some of the kind of cool interludes between Joe and Dave, I wanted to turn it over to Reggie just to give a little highlight on who Joe Morello was and what Joe Morello did for the Brubeck sound. So Reggie Jackson, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you, my brother. Hello, everyone. I won't speak long because we have some great music to listen to. But yeah, I'll briefly just speak to what Michael was talking about. Joe Morello was an absolutely amazing drummer. Technically was absolutely incredible, but probably what was more what was more amazing was with all of his technical ability, how he always kept the music first. So everything he did was always very tasteful and nothing ever to kind of like show off, even though he could play a one-hand drum roll and literally you would just hit the floor. It was just the most amazing thing. But he didn't always do that. He just always played what was the right thing for the group and for the music at the time. And so as we listen, keep that in mind. But also too, the other great thing about Joe, along with what Dave was doing with pushing the envelope rhythmically and harmonically, Joe was doing the same thing. So some of the things that you might pick up on is some of the songs that are, there are some songs that are in time signature of 3/4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The interesting thing with Joe, hopefully I wasn't going to do this, but hopefully this will just.
How could you not do this? Come on.
But if you have that 3/4 tempo, for example, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Joe does an interesting thing by, instead of marking that 3/4 time, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, he does an interesting thing of making the 3 sound like 4, so that there's all of a sudden this 2 against 3, which is that's hallmark African rhythmic pulse, where you have polyrhythms. You have a 2 feel, 1 2 1 2 against a 1 2 3 1 2 3. So he would take that 3 feel, 1 2 3 1 2 3, and make it sound like it was in a 2 feel or a 4 feel, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. So it's really interesting, because now all of a sudden you have this push pull that Michael was speaking about before, but you also have that rhythmically happening in the drums. So it just creates all this exciting tension within the music. So I just wanted to point that out while you're listening, and you'll hear it in other aspects. There's one of the examples, there's some absolutely incredible metric modulation that is going on that Joe is doing. They're playing in 3. He plays this dotted quarter note rhythm that he uses to become the new quarter note, and then plays this really slick, like, swing feel. Okay, I'm gonna stop because I could go on, but just keep all those things in mind when you're listening. It's really some incredible things that Joe and Dave are doing. So anyway.
And one of the things that I'll just add to what Reggie is before we listen to this next recording is while all that's happening with Joe Morello, you have Eugene Wright on the bass, literally laying down the only thing that's the actual true beat.
Exactly.
And Dave, while Joe's doing this thing between 3/4 and 4/4, you've now set off Brubeck to explore 9/8 over top of that, or 6/8 over the top of that, in these different rhythmic patterns. So Paul Desmond once said, and I read this, I didn't hear him say it, but I read this, that Paul Desmond once said, when he would get done playing his solos, the reason why he would literally stand off to the side at the edge of the piano is because he couldn't be near what was happening, because it was just too much. It was too much rhythm. So, so this next one is actually it's about a 3-minute clip. Well, it's not a clip; it's a sound recording from their concert at live at Carnegie Hall. Which, keep in mind, as you listen to this, they all had the flu and still did the concert. So, and listen to the interchange. So while we start with the end of Paul Desmond's solo, and we pick up with Brubeck's solo on the piano, listen to how he starts to interact more with Joe Morello as his solo starts to increase, and listen to the rhythmic devices that Brubeck's using. And then when they start feeding off each other, you can see where they just start to take it to this whole new level. So the things that Reggie was talking about, and things that now we're going to see them actually combine and start working. So let's go ahead and listen to Pennies, the solo from the Carnegie Hall concert from Pennies from Heaven. Oop. So there's that. I mean, it's just a classic interchange between the two of them. And that's what really excited audiences about the live performances that Brubeck was doing. I mean, that's on college campuses, you had, I would call it the intellectual crowd, because it was the college audiences that really pushed Brubeck in the late 50s, going into the 60s, into that world of just excitement when they would hear it, and all these different things going on, and not only that, but I don't know if you want to comment on what we just heard, Reggie, but it started out very simple, and then you heard Brubeck go into those big block chords, but yet he still created it almost like a little bit of a ballad over the top of this swing tune, where the space naturally Morello just filled in something there until it just grew and grew and grew until they did this complete interchange back and forth.
Exactly, and to me, that's one of those. That's one of the great things about that group, is that interplay that would happen. But to me, the even more exciting thing is that, you know, it's jazz, that is improvised. You know, that isn't scripted out. Okay, you play here, then I'm going to play here. You know, that happened on the spur of the moment. And like you're saying, Michael, I mean, that's the exciting thing about seeing them live, is you would go and no one knew what was going to happen. They didn't. And so it's just an amazing thing to not only hear, but even see at the time. And to me, that's the wonderful thing about this group. And, you know, they sparked that with other groups in just that fearlessness in experimenting on, you know, okay, let's just go in and just play. We'll have our basic structure, but hey, anything goes.
I love the line. My wife, when we started dating and I started playing again, and I think it was after a show that Reggie was playing with me at that time, and it was one of those nights we did 2 nights back to back with the same set. I don't remember where it was, but anyways, Pam was with us, and she goes, "I don't understand. How come you guys played this song and it was like only like 5 minutes last night, but tonight it had to be like 12 minutes long?"
Right.
You just don't know where it's going to take you.
Right.
Now, when we get to these with Brubeck, and that recording was actually from the 60s. And I encourage you to, we're showing you purposely the album covers so you can go out and get these albums and listen to them as we just play these examples. But Blue Rondo a la Turk, just to give you an idea of the excitement and the energy that they had. And even though they had the flu during this concert, it starts out with the traditional, the tempo, but by the time they get through the whole solo section, improv section, it's a race. By the time they get back there, it's just crazy because the energy built up and the tempo shifted so much faster throughout their interchange. But that's another great interchange between Brubeck and Morello. So fast, kind of hanging out now in the classic quartet scene is that Time Out we're going to talk about tonight and study Take 5 a little bit. But after Time Out came the next album, which was Time Further Out. And these were written after Brubeck had done all the State Department tours. In the late 50s, the State Department chose the Brubeck Quartet and Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington as the US ambassadors to go out and bring jazz to the world. Later, Dizzy Gillespie joined this and others like Ella and stuff. But Brubeck was one of those in the 50s that went out and did it, which actually I think when we talk about the composition in a couple sessions from now, his compositions, we're going to study the real ambassadors, which Brubeck is a musical that Brubeck wrote for Louis Armstrong and Carmen McRae and all these cats who were also State Department reps. But Brubeck was going into all these countries, and so he was fascinated by the gypsy rhythms. Blue Rondo a la Turk comes from the gypsy rhythms of Turkey. When he was over there, that's what he started to infuse his music with. And so there's other ideas that he started bringing in. And one of the songs from the Time Further Out album is in 7/8, and it's a song called Unsquare Dance. And later in the jazz world, I mean, there's a great Lincoln Center recording with Wynton Marsalis and the orchestra, whole big band arrangement that they play on Square Dance, and then they jam on and have a good time. But back when it was being recorded in 1960, experimenting with a time like this was really far out. And it was not something that was normal, especially in American culture where we didn't have these type of rhythms, folk rhythms that they did in Middle East and in Europe. So when he came back and was writing them, the guys were very much in the recording studio. This is the first time they were doing them. If you listen to those initial recordings and then you listen to live recordings like a year or two later of them playing those tunes, you can tell they've freed up. They feel good playing them. They've been playing in 7/4 for a while now. They're getting used to it. But when they were first recording, it was kind of conservative as far as improvising. So I'm going to play on Square Dance, and you don't hear big solos. You don't hear them improvising. In fact, Paul Desmond doesn't even play on it. He's like, I'm just going to clap, and you can record me clapping on it. I'm not going to play in 7/8. And so what it is Joe Morello's playing this on the sticks, on the rims of the drum, and he's going between one tom and the next tom. And so you can hear oftentimes if you have that type of speaker setup, you feel like, oh, one drummer's playing and another drummer's playing, but it's actually just Joe going back and forth on it. And when they get done with the song, you can actually hear Joe at the end, this kind of relief that, hey, we made it through 7/8. So we're going to play now for you. It's only a 2-minute recording, and it's the whole recording from the Time Further Out album of Unsquare Dance. So that's that classic Studio Brubeck recordings, and I love listening to those, especially because it was so raw of exposing jazz to that type of music and those type of elements. What's interesting is one of the reasons people have been amazed, like Brubeck is so popular in Middle Eastern cultures, Moscow and Russia. He was the first American artist to go past the Iron Curtain when we started. When Reagan and Gorbachev started doing the exchanges, and like I shared with you, it was because they were smuggling his music in and they were listening to it, but it's because it was relatable to their cultures. Here in the United States, we were being introduced to it almost for the first time. This next recording, so that's the studio recording. This next recording is also from the Time Further Out album, where Brubeck became, after the success of Time Out, Brubeck became more advantageous to start writing more rhythmic ideas into the music. And so this next one is actually, it's a reggae waltz. So it's in 3/4, because that's the waltz part. It's in 2/4 or 4/4, well, 2/4/4, sorry. And that's the ragtime feel, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But in the middle section, it goes into 3/2 and a 2/2 feel, and then it switches back to 3/4 and 4/4, overlapping at the same time. That's just the written part. Then when they get into the improvisation part, when you're gonna hear this piano solo, Brubeck is playing, and you can kind of feel like this waltz going on and stuff. But this is where you're gonna hear what Reggie was talking about. Almost, you can't tell if it's in 4/4 or 3/4. when you're listening to this, the only way you're actually only able to really tell what the time signature is, listening to it, is by digging into the bass and hearing what the bass is actually playing. But what's interesting is you're gonna hear, and I don't know if the answer, I don't know if I've asked the question what you guys will think. Half of you will probably think one way or the other way. But is Brubeck pushing Morello towards the end of the solo section, or is Morello is it Morello pushing Brubeck? Because they start to go into this jam towards the end of the solo before they break back into the actual song again. And so I'm gonna let this play out. The solo from this is actually a live recording again. And this is their solo section from this live recording, and listening to how the two of them working together. Brubeck still being true to his form of playing in multi-different key signature or time signatures and key signatures at the same time, but listen to how Morello shapes everything around this. So it's another classic recording of Brubeck live. So I don't know about you, but I never feel the waltz ever in that solo at all. Yeah, go ahead, Reggie.
Oh, yeah, and it's so funny in listening to that again. What is so amazing is listening to what Joe plays. He's playing a jazz 3/4 waltz pattern but playing that, 2/4 feel with the hi-hat, and then he's playing the dotted quarter notes in the 3, which gives it another layer of 2 against 3, and all of that is happening underneath the bass player, who's just literally playing the downbeats of the 3, and then Joe is playing he's going in and out of all of that. It's pretty remarkable. It's really remarkable.
I could listen to that solo over and over again and still find something new every time I hear it, both harmonically what he's doing, and then how it develops. I mean, it's just such a great example of just pure Brubeck's mind, and then the guys working with him. I mean, truly, to work with Brubeck, you had to be the genius on that level with him to understand what was happening musically.
Exactly.
Which leads us into our next part here. And so, arguably, I think without argument, I guess, is that if anyone said, what is the main classic song that you can identify with Brubeck, it would be Take 5. And as soon as you hear that, everyone knows what's coming. It is such a distinguishable thing. And what came from the idea of the horses clip clop, clip clop, clip clop, clip clop, clip clop, clip clop, to being merged into a whole idea of transforming music, creating a new sound of cool, establishing a new time signature that just became, and didn't not only just became a part of jazz, but really moved itself in, because of Brubeck's transformation of the music, pushed itself into what Bernstein was writing in New York, was pushing itself into Broadway, was pushing itself into rock and roll, was pushing itself. I mean, his experiences in 1959 in 1959, and pushing that into the time really just changed people's ideas about time signatures and how we use them and how we embrace them in music today. So a lot of the stuff that we introduced to some people doesn't sound weird. It's like, okay, that sounds okay. But think back in 1959, 1960, this was really far out. So the fact that his group had so much success around it is really somewhat of a miracle when you kind of think about it. So the time going into and recording the Time Out album, we know the classic Brubeck Take 5 sound. I mean, it's used in movies, commercials, backgrounds. Every jazz station still, I mean, it's hard not to find it somewhere being played in our daily culture still, 60 some years later. But it was not the easiest thing to get to necessarily. And so we thought it'd be fun, before we examine Joe Morello and what happened in the official recording of Time Out, is to actually give you kind of like a sneak peek of them trying to work out Take 5. And so you'll hear, these are sound clips from the actual recording sessions where they're working out Take 5 in the studio. And from that, you'll hear Joe Morello struggling a little bit to remember, okay, how are we doing this Take 5? How does this feel? I will warn you, there's a little bit of an explicitive that you hear out of frustration from them trying to get the time right. But it's a great example of them developing Take 5. That's the first part of this recording. Then it phases into the one of the recordings they did of Take 5, which you're going to be interested to hear if you listen to the drums and you listen to the tempo too. It's different than what you hear. And then what I did is I put at the very end of this example the actual Take 5, just a snippet of it, so we can get into our mind what went through their process in the studio to get to that timeless classic that we've all fallen in love with. It is that pure Brubeck sound. So these are outtakes from recording Take 5, and then you'll hear how it transpired through time. So we're kind of fast looping here a couple of hours or days in the studio, but just kind of gives you an idea of how they were working it out.
Wait a minute.
Okay. You count it off, Joe.
I just forget what my beat is. No. Wait a minute. See. How would it count? No, that's not it. Isn't that a... Our own coffee down here.
I forgot it. Wait a minute. Say, I'll get it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No? Yeah, all right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I'll see it.
Okay. Did I blow it?
No, I didn't.
Okay, try it again. That's great. This is all rehearsal.
Yeah. You're goddamn right it is.
Okay.
Okay,
And I'm not getting paid
take
for it.
5.
Here we go. Let's do something else. We'll come back to this.
Why don't we come back to this?
I don't care about that.
So that kind of just sets you up that you got to hear it kind of was quicker. The original recording was quicker, and you had a time feel that he was playing where it didn't even feel like it was 5. It was like ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. So and then I think you probably all felt this like ease a little bit when you actually heard the original final recording, which is the short example at the end of the recording. I'm going to turn over to Reggie to talk about Joe Morello's classic solo on this Time Out album, and then we'll listen to it.
Oh, and I just have to say, it's interesting. I don't think I haven't heard that in a while, the outtakes, or if at all. But it's so funny to me to where you can hear. Remember we were talking about before where they would take 3 and make it sound like it's 2. So you could definitely tell they were trying to take that same approach with 5, but certainly they were not comfortable with that yet. And so it's just really interesting to hear, like all of us musicians, we want to push the envelope as far as we can, but sometimes there's a saying that I like to tell myself when I'm in a session in a studio, which is keep it simple, stupid. Just go with what works. So it's so great because that's what they ended up doing. But what's interesting to me too is you'll hear is the next level is Joe playing a solo in 5, which number one, nobody did. I mean, that just, you never heard that. And then also too, the introduction of soloing over a vamp, where you actually hear a lot of that more often now, where the band might play a figure or some chords, and then the drummer plays over top of that. Prior to this, it was always either trading 4s, where the band would play or a horn player or piano player would solo for 4 bars. Then everybody would stop and then give it to the drummer by himself. Now you have this thing where the band is playing time underneath in this vamp, and then Joe is soloing over top of it. And then it's just amazing. All of these are kind of like first, all at the same time. This idea of soloing over a vamp and soloing in 5. It's incredible.
So here's the Take 5 drum solo. That's the classic rhythm of Brubeck. So going from the studio sessions and the classic Brubeck sound, the classic quartet came to an end in 1968, and Brubeck took a couple years off to start writing actually classical compositional work, which we'll talk about later in this series. But when he started getting out and playing at the jazz festivals and jazz circuits and started writing jazz standards again for the quartet, the new quartet that he had featured bass player Jack Six, who took Eugene Wright's seat. Jerry Mulligan took Paul Desmond's seat as saxophone. And Jerry Mulligan, you would know from the from working all the way back with totally just drew a blank. The Birth of the Cool. The what's it called, Reggie? The Birth of the Cool. The what's his name?
Miles? Talking about Miles?
Yeah, but who did all the writing for it?
Oh,
Well, he's great.
yes.
Jesus, I can't believe I'm forgetting this. But anyways,
Yeah.
And then drummer that replaced Joe Morale in the new quartet was a drummer by the name of Alan Dawson. And Alan Dawson played with really a slew of people. Do you want to introduce him, Reggie?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Alan Dawson was an amazing drummer. And not only played with Brubeck, but played with Sonny Rollins, and actually was kind of like a first call guy in the Boston, New York area, East Coast area. Funny thing, he also is one of the best.
Could you try again?
Oh, sorry about that. My Siri on my watch. So Alan was also an amazing teacher, and he didn't teach at Berkeley. A lot of students who went to Berkeley, because Alan was in the area, would take lessons with him while they were in school there. But I mean, his influence has literally gone on for generations. I mean, there are guys now at Berkeley that are still teaching Alan's techniques and ideas. So he's just an incredible drummer and musician, as you'll hear.
So this is actually from the 1970s. This is the Newport Jazz Festival, one of the longest one of probably the most noted jazz festivals. And so Brubeck was almost a regular there every year. And so this is from their set, and their whole hour-long set, they only played 3 songs. This is one of them. Take 5 was one of them. And so we're just going to play the Brubeck solo. And what overall sound-wise, when you listen to this, you can hear Alan's infectious, tasty way of playing and treating the rhythms and treating Brubeck. You can hear a difference in the sound of this whole quartet. I mean, it's going to sound different, much more of a fusion feel to it. And what's interesting is that, we've heard all these. We heard with the classic Brubeck Quartet and those studio recordings, especially, like I said, very conservative. This is brand new. We're trying this out. This is an experiment. Here, now we're 10, 12 years later, 15 years later, playing in the 70s from when they released those original recordings. And you can tell that these musicians playing with Brubeck's very comfortable in his zone. These guys are very comfortable now playing in these time signatures, and you can just really hear them free up. So this is about 5 minutes. We're going to go a few minutes late just because we had some technical difficulties, and this will be the last recording that we'll play. But I will hit on some of Dawson's recordings later with Brubeck. And so this is live from Newport. This is the piano solo and Alan Dawson's back and forth with Brubeck on this recording. So last set at Newport, take 5, and then we'll do some questions after this. So as you listen to that, that's just a different style within the quartet itself, and you can tell how it's evolutionizing through the decades. If we had more time, and we will at other things, at other sessions, I'll play for you when we do the classic quartet review next week, actually, with George Michael. You'll hear Alan Dawson again as he develops the quartet through the 70s and then going into the 80s. So, but we hope that was kind of a nice introduction to really get a sense of the innovation of time that Brubeck's using with improvisation and his writing to really completely re-identify a style of music that was really locked in and ingrained in 4/4 with the occasional 3/4 in the songs themselves, and totally expanded to a new concept and idea. Reggie, I don't know if you have any ideas to close out here before we take some questions, if you have anything to add.
Oh, no, I thought you did a great job. I mean, yeah, it's just amazing to hear and just think about, like you said, Brubeck and the group just kind of exploring and introducing these new ideas that prior to them just hadn't happened yet.
So with that, we'll go ahead and take some questions, and I'll let Mindy and Trisha, I forget how you guys do it, but we'll, Reggie and I would love to take some questions, and thank you again for joining us for this evening so that we could share this element. You can't understand Brubeck, I think, and his evolution of jazz without understanding the rhythm and the drummers that were there at the beginning and middle part of his career as he was developing the sound. So I'm so grateful that Reggie was here to join us, and we look forward to taking some questions.
What's amazing is the space in between each of the beats that they hear.
Yeah, you know, I totally agree. I mean, that is, I think that's the most important part, especially when you're playing these different time signatures, especially time signatures that you're not comfortable playing, is understanding that space in between those beats. It's funny, when I teach, that's one of the things I'm super critical with my students with, is this idea of subdivisions, which is how we divide beats. You know, you can divide a beat into 2, 3, 4, 6. I mean, you can even do 5, 7, but it just focuses you to really understand not only the time, but the space. And if you understand that, you can really manipulate it like what we just heard. I mean, what Alan and Dave were doing on that last example, it's really incredible.
He says he's strict with his students about it. It's not only his students. Just want to put that out there. I know Reggie's frustrated with time when he asks if he can cut out the piece instead of me. So
no. No. You play great. You got a great sense of time. Any other questions? Just want to make sure.
Well, I will say that I will ask the question to Reggie that I think is when you're listening to these Brubeck recordings. I mean, for me, this is what I grew up listening to, not knowing that this was not normal in jazz, and that this was very evolutionary, and that this was very specialized, you know, almost cult following of within the jazz circles, but also appreciated by the non-jazz audiences. I mean, classical audiences love Brubeck, but they'll say they hate jazz. Yeah. And then you get pure jazz purists that will not like it, but then you have other jazz purists that say, well, this is jazz at its finest because of the cultural exchange that Brubeck takes basically global world music and puts it into one kind of entity. But then yet I'll have kids in sessions, you know, teaching or whatever, that they'll listen to jazz and they're like, yeah. And then all of a sudden we'll be playing like a take 5 or something like that. And all of a sudden they're into it for some reason. So Brubeck speaks differently for some reason across many different styles. And I think in the same way that Louis Armstrong spoke across many different genres and styles of music, but coming out of the jazz world, Brubeck did the same. So when you listen to it, what do you think with the whole style of Brubeck, and especially, what we talked about today with the invention, his reinvention of rhythm being introduced into the sound?
Oh yeah, I'm unmuted. Unmuted. I was gonna say, to me, the thing that I think I'm most excited about, obviously, aside from just the incredible rhythmic and even harmonic things that are going on with what you were talking about in the introduction, for me, what's amazing is the composition of what he's doing in terms of having these complex harmonies and rhythms going on, but yet there's a very simple melody that kind of glues it all together. And so to me, I think that's the other just exciting and wonderful thing of Brubeck is, like the melody to Take Five. It's really catchy.
Mhm.
You can, it's nothing that, is kind of out there at all, other than it's in five, but the melody is written in such a way that it almost doesn't even really hit you that it's in five. And so for me, that's one of those things that when I listen to his compositions, I'm just really drawn to, wow, how can you write a melody in an odd time signature and still make it accessible, not only to the listener, but to want the listener to hear it even more. That's a really tricky thing to do. It's really amazing.
Any other questions or comments before we? Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. Reggie and I at least had fun.
Oh yeah.
As you can, the hard part about doing Zoom is that I forget, like, when the music's playing, because it goes to that screen, I forget, oh, but that doesn't mean my camera's off. Just you're bouncing around and jamming with it. But
Right.
I love the fact that we're able to share this music, and we will be playing again someday. We'll be out playing
Yes.
jazz, and you guys will come and see us and visit Reggie and I, and we'll be doing it again. So just got to hold on a few more months, right? I guess, right?